This video is about interpretation and discussion in qualitative research. And in particular, I will be giving some writing tips and key items to consider to structure your discussion chapter of your thesis. That is, if you are a master's student or a PhD student and don't know how to start your discussion chapter, this is the material that you need to know about, and it will definitely help you. The material is supported by a book from Bloomberg and Volpe called Completing Your Qualitative Dissertation, a roadmap from beginning to end, the 4th edition from 2019. So it is really about scrutinizing what you found and what you presented in your thesis findings or results chapter to discover what it means or the meaning you make out of your findings. So first, it's important that you know what do you mean and what do I mean by interpretation here. So according to Bloomberg and Volpe, interpretation is about making a version of what you think the data means or what you can deduct or work out from your data. It involves reading through or beyond your findings. It's about answering the why and why not questions around your findings. Interpretation involves more conceptual and integrative thinking than data analysis alone. Also, interpretation moves the analytic process to a higher level where you, the researcher, you get to new understandings by doing this exercise. So you need to think about what is going on in your data, what the overall story being told by your findings, why the story is significant or important, and what can be learned from your findings. Any lessons learned are usually brought by your own understandings and your own insights based on your experience, culture, and history, and the meaning that come from comparisons with the literature and previous research that you came up with, when you did your literature review phase. Interpretation is a way of combining your own ideas collectively with what has been reported in the literature in the form of contradictions, correspondence, and or more depth. And something else to keep in mind is reflexivity or reflections. This becomes important again in this part of your thesis writing as you challenge your own assumptions, preconceived ideas, and possible biases when you search for, identify, and describe different explanations. So let's start with the things that you need to consider to help you structure your discussion/interpretation chapter. So first one that you need to know about and care about and think about is subjectivity. That is your subjectivity. So any biases, assumptions, stereotypes, prejudices are they need to be tracked and they need to be accounted for. Subjectivities have to be made as transparent as possible. And here, subjectivity is embedded in all layers and phases of your data analysis and the interpretive process. In this chapter, you shift from being an objective reporter to a researcher that provides informed and insightful commentary or storytelling. Then you need to reflect on your study findings. So Bloomberg and Volpe thought about analysis and qualitative research in the sense of reflecting on your study findings and what these possibly mean. To help with this process, they provided a tool, and I can't put it in here because of copyright reasons, because I would have to directly get it from their book. So just so you are aware, this tool is available as figure 10.1 and under appendix CC of their book. But just so you know, their interpretation outline tool is based on continuous reflections over your findings by asking why and why not over and over again as the driving method to interpret findings. This could be done using analytic categories that correspond with each research question. And for transparency, Bloomberg and Volpe suggest including a completed version of this interpretation outline in your thesis appendix to show the logical development and overview of your interpretive process. So use this tool or without it, even think about your findings and then ask the question of why and why not over and over again. To unveil the deeper meanings behind your results, behind your findings, the advice that they gave is to structure your discussion based on three things. And this is really useful to know. And they've included these from page 282. So the first one, significant patterns among your findings. Second one, making use of description and interpretation. And the third point is providing some sort of synthesis or integration. And I'll go through each one of these in more detail just now. So in doing so, because you're using all these techniques, you ask yourself, what are the key concepts you have used in your study? How do your results shed light on the original research problem as set out in your introduction to the thesis, and the related literature and or your theory. So you need to decide the type of story you want to tell and the structure of your chapter. Keeping your findings, your results in context and thinking holistically should be a principle or two principles that you need to follow. So this is before we get into each of one of these three details. Each one of these 3 points, you need to plan your interpretation piece to start with. So, okay, let's have a look at the first key point to consider when you structure your discussion or interpretation chapter, which is examining patterns and themes. So this activity involves you closely examining patterns and themes and even sub-themes, the trends that you see emerging from your findings that run through the findings. And this is very different from saying themes, your themes, like actual themes or findings. This is different. It's just a general way of describing, patterns. So analysis in here allows for discussion of major themes, and even sub-themes should not be overlooked. Looking for emergent patterns is considered a first round of analysis, but Bloomberg and Volpe see it important to look across findings and across dimensions of each of your findings. One result of analysis involves finding patterns, themes, and sub-themes. Another result of analysis involves finding and closely examining ambiguities and as well as inconsistencies. On the one hand, you want to determine how useful your findings are in revealing the research questions and how central they are in telling the story. On the other hand, you want to also challenge your own understanding by searching for discrepancies and negative instances in the patterns. Seek alternative explanations as they always exist. You have to tolerate some ambiguity, so you need to look at issues from all angles. Be prepared to do that. Once you establish patterns, you then need to explain them using your experience as well as your intuition. You also need to consult the literature as part of this phase and consider your pattern findings in the light of previous research and existing theory. Also look for confirmations, look for contradictions with previous research, look for ways to explain differences and similarities. And as you start to do so, you then start to describe and interpret your material, which now leads us to the next key point to consider when you structure your discussion chapter. So this second part that you need to consider is about description, it's about interpretation. This activity is characterized by what they call thick descriptions. Description normally precedes interpretation. Description conveys the complexity of your data, while interpretation tries to attach significance to what was found. And the authors here stress on paying attention to any methodological approaches used, as these influence the interpretation chapter. For example, grounded theory studies engage a series of coding procedures to develop a story of propositions with the goal of presenting a visual model or theory. So it's usually done in a certain way, and there is an expectation of discussing, of interpreting the findings in grounded theory in a certain way. So you have to pay attention to your methodological approach and follow that approach based on your reading of the literature attached to that methodology. Now, the last activity that Bloomberg and Volpe talked about as a way to help you structure your discussion and interpretation chapter is about synthesis and integration. So synthesis is a process where you pull together how the research questions are answered using your findings, the extent to which or the degree to which the findings that come from your data collection methods can be interpreted in the same way. Also, how your findings relate to the literature and how your findings relate to your prior assumptions about your study. Synthesis is not a linear process like quantitative analysis. This is important to keep in mind. It is about portraying a holistic picture of the phenomenon that you are studying. It is an ongoing process throughout the analysis. It is about combining individual units of analysis into a more integrated whole. It is about giving your research a broader sense than your research topic. For example, any broader social issues, perhaps any fundamental disciplinary frameworks, and so on. Each analysis is a process in critical as well as creative capabilities that you have to do as a researcher. So hopefully this video gave you an idea about interpretation, about discussion in qualitative research, and hopefully I gave you some writing tips as well as some key items to consider in order to structure and help you structure your discussion and interpretation chapter if you are doing qualitative research.